Okay, we are now live.
Jen, I was able to quickly make that change, so good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Hello, everybody. It looks like we've got a couple attendees. And maybe just wait a couple more minutes to see if we get some more attendees, but I'm Jennifer Ott, Assistant City Manager, and we'll do introductions of all city staff in a second, but let's wait a couple more minutes and see if we can get a couple more attendees, and then we'll get started. All right, looks like we actually lost one. That was not,
not going the right way.
Not going the right way. All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. And then we'll make sure that we put all this material on our website, maybe send it to the developer list that we sent this out to. So we make sure that everyone has a chance to look at the recommendations and the findings, but why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Jennifer Ott, Assistant City Manager. And why don't we just go around? Alex, do you want to start?
Yes, I'm Alex Ameri. I'm the Director of Public Works for the city. Sharman.
I'm Sharman Sola. I'm the Senior Transportation Engineer here in Public Works.
Jeremy, do you want to go? Or Steve?
Hi, I'm Stephen Chang, Public Works Transportation Pilot.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jeremy Lukirko, I'm Acting Planning Manager and Development Services.
Michael, do you want to go?
Michael.
Sure. Michael Wolney, Senior Secretary, Public Works.
And then Michaela, you want to?
Yeah, hi, I'm Michaela Jellicoe. I'm a senior economist with Community Attributes, Inc., and we have been working with supporting the city in their analysis for this project.
Great. And then Elliot, do you want to introduce yourself?
I will. Thanks, Jen. Elliot Weiss, a planner and project manager for Community Attributes as well, working with Michaela, and have been doing some feasibility analysis to support this project.
Great, thanks. We're glad you're here and here to talk a little bit about our traffic impact fee. We're going to share our screen and do a presentation, and then we're happy to answer questions or take comments. And then we will definitely make sure we put this information on our webpage and send it out to our developer list to make sure that everyone has access to our recommendations, and we can try to solicit some additional feedback as well through that process. So I think I'll kick us off. This is our stakeholder meeting related to the City of Hayward traffic impact fee, which the city has not had and has never had. Next slide. And so we're, after many years of not having a traffic impact fee where most cities and most jurisdictions do in Alameda County and the Bay Area, we've gone through kind of an extensive process of working on really wanting to try to address the traffic impacts in Hayward and have a fee to help the city make sure it has a sustainable funding source for addressing those issues. So the agenda, quickly, we'll just go through our city goals and purpose, our process overview, feasibility findings, staff's recommendation, the jurisdictional comparisons. You can see how we kind of stack up and what we're proposing stacks up related to some of the surrounding jurisdictions. And then kind of there's a local transportation analysis process that the city does as well. We want to make sure we're really upfront and clear about how the fee and that process are integrated. And then we'll open up for questions and answers if there are some. So just to kind of step back and big picture, why is the city doing this? Why is it doing this now? And as I already mentioned, the city has never had a traffic impact fee. Most jurisdictions, if not all, I believe in Alameda County and most of the Bay Area have traffic impact fees, and the City of Hayward hasn't. And so because of that, we are often, we don't have sustainable sources for upgrading our city streets, and so that becomes a problem. And we know we have traffic issues in the city. It's one of the #1 issues we hear about from residents in our survey that we do. And so this becomes a way that we can try to mitigate those impacts. It's something we hear from developers often, that the process of getting through our development review process, that we're kind of evaluating these impacts as each development application comes in. And so as that second bullet says, one of our other real important goals is to streamline that process. So it's clear you pay the impact fee for these types of impacts. There may be the need for some larger projects to do some additional transportation review process, but generally this should streamline our review process. It also provides kind of what those costs and impacts are up front. So it really provides additional certainty for developers when they're coming into our development process. We also want to just make really clear, we are a pro-development city. So the last thing we want to do is disincentivize new development. And so we've taken care, hiring Michaela and Elliot to come in, is to really make sure we're looking carefully at our fee, how we set our fee. There are maximums that are allowed through our Nexus study, but we really wanted to take care to say, hey, well, each land use, what can they really afford? And then really look at where surrounding jurisdictions are. We do not want to be the one at the top of the list. We want to be one kind of in the middle that's really trying to be, fair and pro development. And we don't want to do anything to disincentivize new development. So a lot of what you'll hear today is how we've taken care to do that. And then lastly, we just know that the timing of this is, right after COVID. And so we've looked carefully at kind of what the land, how different land uses are faring post-COVID, or it's not post-COVID, but as post the kind of some of the economic impacts. And so we've really tried to be attentive to what we're proposing, what kind of impact that might have on certain sectors that have been hit hardest by the COVID pandemic. Next slide. So the process is the traffic impact fee. We call it the TIF. We did perform the legal Nexus study that provides those maximum allowable fees. That's not what, generally we're not recommending that today. We did a feasibility study that actually analyzed the development feasibility of an impact of adding a TIF to the cost of development. And then we also looked across jurisdictions kind of nearby and around us. Where do our existing fees as well as where our recommended fees compare to those surrounding jurisdictions? And we'll be presenting our recommendation as well. The local transportation analysis process I already mentioned is kind of what do you need to do to there might be circulation impacts, or because of the size of a project, it might have additional kind of impacts on a particular intersection that are really beyond that traffic impact. And so we will still have a local transportation analysis and process, but we've really tried to simplify it. And so a lot of projects we're hoping don't have to go through that if they're smaller, and don't trigger certain kind of milestone or steps, but we will be closely integrating these two processes to try to provide as much upfront certainty to developers. So it's really clear what you need to do when, and try to get as much of those costs identified up front so that you have more certainty going into the development process. Next slide. And I think, is this when I turn it over to you, Michaela? Oh, you're on mute, or you're on mute.
Yes, thank you, Jen.
Okay, great.
Awesome. So we started by looking sort of at some of the benefits of a TIF for the city of Hayward. And as Jen has mentioned, some of those include increasing certainty. So the TIF allows for scheduled to be available in advance, allowing developers to plan for an approximate fee based on that schedule. And it ensures that those system-wide transportation improvement costs, not your very localized costs addressed through the LTA, but those system-wide costs are spread across all new development. It also simplifies the process. So the overall LTA process is simplified, and those improvements that are captured through the TIF are excluded from the LTA process. And as a result, this means that with a TIF, some of those traffic study costs are reduced, sometimes by half, depending on the particular development. And it also reduces approval time. So currently it's about 12 weeks for approval. And with a TIF, it reduces it to approximately 6 to 8 weeks. So those are some of the benefits of a TIF. And then we also looked at development feasibility. And we worked with the city to find several prototypes, or what we're calling prototypes, but typical development options within the city to just understand how current market conditions and the current city fee load has an impact on the overall feasibility of different types of development. So what we found is that industrial warehouse, as I think probably likely we expected, has extremely strong regional demand, and the central location that Hayward enjoys is a big benefit towards achieving some or realizing some of that regional demand for that type of development. And our results showed a positive residual land value. Essentially, what that means is that after accounting for all development costs, including developer return, there's enough essentially feasible, there's enough benefit or development benefit left to cover the cost of land within Hayward. We also looked at life sciences uses, which are also would be classified as an industrial type use, which are also enjoying strong regional demand currently. But the development costs for these use types are high, and they also need high rents, upward of $50 per square foot to be feasible. So we put those in a more possible scenario of feasibility. We also looked at single family residential and multifamily residential, and these both resulted in somewhat more marginal feasibility results, but for different reasons. I'm sure as many of you know, single family residential is experiencing strong regional demand as well. And there is current development, especially among townhouse type development, strong sale prices, but this is somewhat offset by high development and land costs, which is why this particular prototype comes up marginal in the feasibility analysis. Multifamily residential has had much more limited recent development within the city of Hayward, and is also impacted by some pandemic impacts, more particularly, especially the ongoing eviction moratoria, which has resulted in decreased lease rates during the time period and increased vacancy rates and credit loss, which create challenges. But these are offset by strong regional demand for housing, which we feel helps make this a greater opportunity for the city as well. And lastly, the most challenged development types that we looked at are retail, both a retail center and restaurant, which both are facing uncertain futures due to the pandemic. As we all know, there's been changes in in-person retail and restaurant usage. And what we found is that the achievable lease rates within the city of Hayward aren't currently supporting new construction. Offsetting a little bit of that is that there are some retail anchors that can make some development more feasible, such as CVS, and housing growth may support some incremental additions to the inventory of both retail and restaurant. Commercial office is also experiencing weak market demand in the city of Hayward, and we found that lease rates generally do not support new construction of this prototype either. So with that in mind, community attributes and the city staff went back to look at what potential rates, what's the recommendation compared to the maximum allowable from the Nexus study. And we arrived at reducing residential rates by 70% and reducing non-residential rates by 30%. And based on those feasibility results, the staff's recommending postponing the implementation of multifamily, retail, and office, all of which are facing challenges in the market right now. And the city staff and team don't want to serve broad economic development purposes and don't want to disincentivize development for product types that are facing challenging market conditions. Based on trip rates and traffic generation, we're including separate categories for types of industrial uses. One for general industrial and one for distribution and e-commerce in particular, which has significantly higher trip generation rates comparatively. And lastly, we're recommending a review of the TIF rates and program after 3 years. So after it's been in progress for a little while, going back and taking a look at how it's been working for the city and the development within the community as well. And then including an automatic annual construction inflation index to help adjust over time for increases in costs and inflation. So single family rates recommended about $3,429 per dwelling unit. General industrial is $3,201 per 1,000 square feet, and distribution and e-commerce at $5,681 per 1,000 square feet. And like I mentioned, multifamily, retail, and office are all being recommended for postponement. Just so you can see where this lands, including other types of impact fees for the city and the recommendations and current for the same prototypes that we looked at for feasibility, we've put together some comparisons for you. So I'll have a series of slides that are going to cover this, and they're all going to look relatively similar. So this one in particular is a single family residence. It's a 3-bedroom, single family attached dwelling unit. It's about 2,000 square feet. And we looked at a selection of regional comparisons, and we've included traffic impact fees, which are the bars on the farthest left, followed by parks in green, and then capital facilities impact fees, fire impact fees, other impact fees, and then affordable housing fees as well, since those can be a significant cost for fee cost. You can see here for single family residential, there's currently no TIF for the city of Hayward, and the addition of $3,429 per dwelling unit TIF increases it just a little bit, and it stays in the same relative position compared to its neighbors in selected comparisons. So above San Leandro and Alameda, but below Fremont, Union City, Sunnyvale, and others. Multifamily, as we've mentioned, this one's being recommended for postponement, so it's going to stay in its same position comparatively, and it's relatively low in comparison to the regional neighbors, but not at the very bottom. And this is for a 1-bedroom multifamily dwelling unit of 700 square feet. So some jurisdictions will charge based on differing factors for TIF for multifamily. So that's why we put a comparison, but for the city of Hayward, we're recommending 1 rate per multifamily dwelling unit. General industrial this is a comparison for a 250,000 square foot, spec warehouse, light industrial. Similarly, Hayward currently is at the very bottom because it has just has a little bit of park impact fee for industrial. With the addition of the recommendation, it moves up a little towards the middle, but still significantly less than some of the other comparison cities, which have can have pretty significant affordable housing fees. Distribution e-commerce is similar, although the rate is a little bit higher given the traffic generation associated with this particular use type. Currently, there is no traffic impact fee, just park impact fee, and with the addition of the park impact or the TIF, excuse me, for a 250,000 square foot distribution center, the total impact fee would be about 1.6 million, which is less than Fremont would estimate at 2.1 million, in Cupertino and Union City, which both have relatively high affordable housing fees as well. Retail also being recommended for postponement, currently has no TIF and no other traffic or impact fees in the city, and is being recommended to remain that way. So at the bottom of the comparison cities, which generally do charge transportation impact fee for retail uses. Office also being recommended for postponement. So still at the bottom, most comparison cities also charge transportation impact fees for office uses as well. And I'm going to hand it over to Charmin to talk through the LCA process.
Hi, everyone. This is Charmin, the Senior Transportation Engineer in Public Works. Now that we have a sense of what the TIF is, I'll quickly go over where the TIF fits into the traffic requirements flow for development projects. The idea here with this flow chart is that the green squares represent questions, the blue bubbles represent results, and the diamonds are links to guidelines for satisfying those traffic requirements. There are 8 columns in total for this flow chart, but since the text is so small, I'll be discussing them in halves. Here in column 1, we begin with our first question. Is a project on the traffic impact fee exemption list? And so everything underlined and in blue font is a hyperlink. So, so that it brings you straight to the source when clicked. I won't be clicking anything today during this presentation, but this flowchart will be posted on our website for anyone to try out. So once you click on the link, bring you straight to the exemption list and check if the development land use type is listed there or not. If it is, then we move forward to the top bubble in column 2 and see that a TIF payment is not required. If we do not see the development land use type on the list, then we proceed to the bottom bubble in column 2 and find that a TIF payment is required. This bubble then points you to the diamond with the TIF table resource. So you can check how much your fee will be and directions on how to pay for that. Now moving on to our second question in column 3. Is the project location in the green zone on Hayward's VMT map? So you would click this VMT map hyperlink and be directed to a map on the city's website. You enter your project address and it will show your project either in a green, yellow, orange, or red zone. If it lands in a green zone, proceed to the top bubble in column 4. And we can see that means CEQA VMT analysis is not required. Any other zone color means that a CEQA VMT analysis is required. This bubble points to the diamond with the hyperlink for the guidelines on how to prepare that analysis. Next slide, thank you. Moving on to the last half of the flow chart, we see our third question in column 5. Does this project generate less than 100 trips in the peak hour? Clicking the hyperlink in this box will direct you to directions on how to calculate this trip generation. If the project is less than 100 peak trips, you proceed to the top level and see that, if the project generates less than 100 peak trips, we move on to the top bubble in column 6 and see that an LTA is not required. However, if the project generates more than 100 trips, then we are directed to the bottom bubble, which shows that an LTA is required. And then points to the diamond in column 6, where the LTA guidelines can be found through that hyperlink. In column 7, we reach our last question. Does the project, there are 3 questions. Does the project modify a feature in the city right-of-way, have a drive-through, or generate 25 peak trips or more onto a residential or collector street? The residential or collector street is a hyperlink here. So you can click to that and it brings you to a map and lets you know what the streets are classified as, if they're residential or collector or arterial. And if you answer yes to any of these questions, then you proceed to the top bubble in column 8 and find out that a component specific memo might be required. Doesn't necessarily mean it is required, but we do suggest that DPW Transportation Division is contacted for more information. And so the diamond in column 8 shows that, brings you to the contact information. It is important to note that the bottom bubble in column 6 moves automatically forward to the bottom bubble of column 8, meaning that a short memo, the component specific memo, won't be required if an LTA is already being done.
Thanks,
And
Sharman.
Will not be
required.
will not be
required.
And just to, I think this was on one of the previous slides, but just to put a finer point on it, thank you, Sharman, is that we think that with this streamlining of the process and with the TIF, that we could see reductions from under our current process, possibly 12 weeks for some traffic analysis, and this could take anywhere, 6 to 8 weeks. So a lot less time. We think a lot less money as well by being able to streamline this and really kind of rely on the TIF for those system-wide impacts, and then really focus in on any kind of circulation or local impacts, and really kind of reserving that for certain types of projects. So we're hoping to really streamline a lot of projects through this process. So we're at the end. We're happy to make this available, and we'll make this available and send it out to the entire developer list that we sent that to, but also to you and your folks as well. So I think now really would love to take questions, comments. We're wanting to get as much feedback as we can over the next couple of weeks so that we can go to the city's council infrastructure committee and present some of these recommendations along with your comments to them, and then ultimately to the council to make final recommendations on the fee. So I think if, and Michael can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think if you'd like to, looks like Zachariah has raised his hand. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like us to consider moving forward, please raise your hand and we're happy to hear from you.
Zachariah, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak. And if you just unmute yourself, please.
Hi, thanks for letting me speak. I first wanted to say I think this was really good work. I had some concerns kind of going in about which you all flagged about the impact on multifamily residential development given the current climate we've been seeing. But I wanted to ask, so I guess what I'll say is I generally support and think the recommendations that you're putting forward are all tailored very well. I think they make sense, just given what I've seen also coming across the desk on the Planning Commission. Just anecdotally, it seems like, you know, the projects that we're asking for the most from in a lot of cases are general industrial and distribution e-commerce projects. We do have some transportation requests that we kind of negotiate with developers on multifamily residential projects. But I can see, you know, maybe the informal process of doing that per case basis may still make sense. But I wanted to ask about the single family development, like the limiting of the impact fee, the traffic impact fee on single family development. I'm curious, I guess a lot of the developments that we see tend to be sort of, I guess, larger, more expensive single family developments. I can't even think of any single family infill that we've even had to review. But my initial thought on the traffic impact fee for single family development would be to increase it beyond what you have already. I don't, you know, maybe even maxing that out. I just don't see what the downside is given the proportionality of that fee in context with the price of the single family development together, and also compared to other cities. It just seems like there's room to do that. And even if it's a marginal, you know, additional fee deposit that the city gets, like it's helpful. But what's the thinking about kind of being more conservative on pressing the single family homes? I understood you put it in the category of marginal impact, but also thinking about kind of ways that we're also trying to incentivize, I guess in some ways with current state legislation and even locally, building more sort of missing middle homes like duplexes, triplexes, and other multifamily developments over single family homes in the infill there. That's really my only question. My only thought could be maybe I could see room to increase the single family impact fee personally, but that's my 2 cents. Otherwise, I just say, you know, really thank you all for doing this great work. I think the city is really going to benefit from this TIF and moving forward. So. But yeah, if I could just hear just some thoughts on the single family home stuff, that would be helpful.
Okay, well, I'll start. Thank you, Zachary. I appreciate it. And I'll start just kind of bigger picture. And then we do have Elliot Weiss, who's here, who prepared the financial analysis, and he can kind of chime in a little bit on what he found. And it was something we talked about, so I think it's a really good point. And so just a couple of thoughts for your consideration. I mean, one is that I think what we don't want is, as we said up front, is to completely disincentivize development to the point where it's not feasible. Now, we might, in this case, have lower fees for multifamily, so therefore creating, we hope, kind of a push towards that use, or certainly wanting to be very careful to not do anything to affect kind of higher density housing, which I know the city wants to try to attract. So a couple things with single family is that what I think Elliot found when he did the feasibility analysis is that because there is pretty high demand for that, you do see that property owners have increased their land values related to that. So it's essentially this kind of, when you have really high demand for a land use, it's almost like a race to capture that land value. And that when you look at land values for single family, that there's only so much that they can support, that it's not quite as, you know, there's not as much profit, so to speak, to there, or land value to kind of, for us to capture in fees, which doesn't mean that, I mean, that's why we're recommending a fee. We definitely think there's some room there. And that over time, property values may change to adjust for fees, but there's, Another consideration there is that costs right now are extremely high across all development types. And so that we think is also impacting the single family sector. Before I turn over to Elliot, I also want to mention is that we are talking about, and I know Zachariah, you know this, is that we are talking about looking at potentially updating our affordable housing ordinance, which may include either a higher percentage of units being made affordable or higher fees in some cases. And so we do also want to be careful that if we're going to be adding fees in another category like affordable housing or adding costs by requiring that developments build more affordable housing, then we want to be kind of careful not to do so much here that we then don't leave ourselves some room to kind of evaluate that as a potential option as well. So just kind of, those are some of my initial thoughts. I don't know if Elliot, you want to chime in on your feasibility analysis, or Alex, if you had anything else to say.
I think from my standpoint, that pretty well covered it, Jen. I am happy to field specific questions about the modeling. As Michaela mentioned, we did employ a residual land value approach. And in the case of the single family prototype, it actually wasn't generating enough value to cover the land costs. But of course, land costs vary on a case-by-case basis. And so we know that there is townhouse development occurring. To some extent, there's some detached single family development occurring, but the conditions really have to align to make those projects work. I mean, the sales prices are high, but the land values are high too. So we think the evidence on the ground, what's being built, justifies some fee, but we categorize this prototype as marginal in terms of overall feasibility because we do know that there are impediments, and the technical modeling sort of bears that out.
I would just add that for the reasons that Jen and Elliot mentioned, we tried to come up with something that is not going to cause a disincentive in terms of development of this type. This process, the whole process of TIF is dynamic. We take a look at it again, adjust the fees either up or sometimes down, depending on the effects that they have had. So the idea is to start with something that is very reasonable and then adjust the fees in time when we look at it again. That's what other cities have done and continue to do. And like I mentioned, some fees go up, some fees go down, and that's what we are planning to do.
Yeah, and I just what I also thought about is that I know there's some question is like wanting to incentivize one use over another, but I think right now the market, I mean, by having some townhome development and single family home development, we're actually getting fees, we're getting property tax. So or we're getting inclusionary housing. So I think we do get benefits from some of these other housing types that aren't as dense. So I just, if we disincentivize it to the point where it's not feasible, then we don't get any of those other benefits from development as well.
Michael?
Is there anyone else? I think it looks like Zachariah wants to talk again, Michael. If no one else, maybe we just hold on a second, see if anyone else wants to chime in or make a comment.
Yeah, I can just quickly make my comment response. I really appreciate that, your answer, Jen. I was also thinking about the affordable housing ordinance in the interplay here, and my particular interest in seeing about levying some affordable housing fees in single family development. So I can see the reasonableness of the kind of lower traffic impact fee and at least holding space for that affordable housing change potentially. If not, also a reevaluation, like Alex just said, of the traffic impact, fee after a few years to see kind of where the cushion's been at with housing prices are continuing to rise. So I just wanted to say I appreciate the response and the thoughtfulness has gone into this study and these recommendations. So really, really thank you all for the great work.
Zachariah, we appreciate it.
Okay, we have one written comment. I'll go ahead and read it.
Go ahead.
From an anonymous attendee. It says, the best way to reduce congestion is to get people out of their cars. The best way to do that is to offer attractive alternatives such as public transit, cycling, and walking. Making it easier to drive and park increases congestion. Please use this money to improve alternatives to driving. Right now, people do not feel comfortable or safe to cycle or walk, including to public transport such as BART.
I wonder, Sharman, do you want to talk a little bit about the analysis that went into the Nexus study? Because I know it was multimodal, and do you want to just chat a little bit about that?
Yes. So on our website, we posted the Nexus study. And in the Nexus study, we have a list of all the approved improvements that could be funded by the TIF. Most of those are all of the improvements that were identified in the bike ped master plan were all included into this list. The cost for vehicle improvements turns out to be only 18% of the total improvement cost. So most of the TIF funding will go to bike and ped improvements. The vehicle improvements that I mentioned, the 18%, it's related mostly to signal infrastructure and equipment. So that kind of thing doesn't just benefit vehicles, it also benefits like transit and bikes and peds. So if you check online, we have the list of approved projects on there. And yeah, thank you.
I don't see any other written comment or other raised hands at this time.
So if anyone wants to chime in on additional ways that we can make sure the development community is aware of this. So if you don't want to say anything now or in the Q&A, please feel free to email us from our webpage or email me or Alex directly. But we'd love to make sure that the development community is aware of this. And we'll send it. We have a list of about 350 contacts. So we'll go ahead and send this PowerPoint out to that list to make sure they're aware of it. But just want to, if anyone has any thoughts on that, please to let us know. Want to make sure we get the word out. Are there any final comments? Alex, are you good wrapping up or?
Yes, I'm good. I was just going to add that if anyone wants me to go to their group and their meetings and make the same presentation or a similar presentation, I'll be happy to do that too.
And one more thing, if you want to email any feedback or questions, the project email address is traffic-impact-fee@hayward-ca.gov. So send anything over there.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.